the prophecy of Jacob regarding Ephraim. Our text is in Genesis chapter 48, verses 17 through 19. It reads as thus: And Joseph, having seen that his father put his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it seemed grievous to him. And Joseph took hold of the hand of his father to remove it from the head of Ephraim to the head of Manasseh. And Joseph said to his father, Not so, father, for this is the firstborn. Lay thy right hand upon his head. And he would not, but said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall be a people, and he shall be exalted. But his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. In Genesis chapter 48, verse 19, that I just read from the ancient Septuagint version of that text, Jacob prophesied that the seed of his grandson, Ephraim, would become a multitude of nations. Now, this is a peculiar sort of blessing that none of the other 12 boys of the fathers of the 12 tribes got. In fact, the last time a blessing as this was given was when it was laid upon Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And to consider that one of the sons of Jacob could become a multitude of nations is quite interesting and peculiar to understand, due to the fact that that kind of blessing, for example, was conferred upon Abraham, that he would be the father of a multitude of nations. But how does this work that one of the sons of Jacob, one of the sons of the 12 tribes of Israel, could then be a father of other nations other than just the Israelites? This is what the issue is. And tonight, Yah willing, we hopefully will get to the bottom of this and investigate really how this has worked out, that one of the tribes of Israel would become a multitude of nations, which means he becomes a patriarch, not only of those of his own family and tribe, but of other nationalities of people. No other one of the 12 tribes had that kind of blessing conferred on them. Not even Judah. So let's look at this. In the Masoretic Hebrew text translation of these verses that were just read in chapter 48 of Genesis, it likewise says multitude of nations. Now, it reads a little bit different than the King James Version of that's in verse 19 of chapter 48 of Genesis. But in the Septuagint and in the Hebrew text, the Masoretic text, it says multitude of nations would come from the seed of Abraham. However, the actual Hebrew word is melo, M-E-L-O, that is used in Genesis 48:19 for multitude, according to Strong's Concordance number 4393. But it can also be translated, instead of multitude, it can be translated as fullness. And that's actually the translation that the Septuagint uses, fullness of the nations. Also, the word in Genesis 49:19 for nations is the Hebrew word goyi. Now, according to Strong's Concordance number 1471 in the Hebrew section, Goyim can be translated as Gentiles. So the phrase mellow of the Goyim means fullness of the Gentiles, which can also be translated from Genesis 48:19 instead of the phrase multitude of nations as it's translated in the King James. If Jacob prophesied in Genesis 48:19 that the fullness of the Gentiles would come through Ephraim, this would give context to the usage of the phrase fullness of the Gentiles in Romans chapter 11, verse 25, as it's used. This term is used by the apostle Shaul, commonly known as Paul. He uses the phrase in Romans 11:25, fullness of the Gentiles. For he says in verse 25, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. If what we just read is the case, then it would mean that Jacob prophesied in Genesis 48:19 that through Ephraim, the fullness of Gentile nationality would be engrafted into Israel through Ephraim. And it's as though when we read Paul's words in Romans 11:25, where he uses the phrase fullness of the Gentiles, it's apparent that he's commenting about the prophecy of Jacob that was foretold by Jacob in Genesis 48:19. This is some new information, and this is something that bears watching. What this means, all these years I've read Paul's reference to fullness of the Gentiles in Romans 11:25, and it's only been fairly recently that I've come to see that he's actually using a phrase that Jacob used over 1,000 years before in reference to one of his descendants, Ephraim, who would be the conduit that Yah would use to bring in the fullness of Gentiles into the Israelite nation. And this is interesting. If this be the case, then it would mean Jacob prophesied in Genesis 48, verse 19, that through Ephraim, the fullness of Gentile nationality would be engrafted into Israel. Now, Israelites, it's so good that we've come to an awakening as to who we are, and hallelujah for that. And I think we've begun to get a little selfish about it. We love the exclusivity of it, and certainly that is a very attractive and human and natural way of thinking. However, Shaul is telling us that I don't want you all to be ignorant of something, though, Israelites. I know you're going through this awakening in these latter days, but you got to look at what Yah's plans are. Israel always want to plan out what Yah says to them, and then they want to use their own plans, and they'll say, well, Yah, well, we'll get back with your plan later. I remember my elder Daniel Ben Hazel, he used to say that Hebrew Israelites had a Burger King mentality, where Burger King had that motto, do it your own way. And lately we've been doing it our own way. It's so exclusive that we are so happy to be chosen, and it's true. Yet there's other people Yah wanted saved other than just Israel. That's the part that sometimes is not so popular to be heard and said in this time of this great awakening. But we're going to investigate from Hosea chapter 7, verse 8 through 9, that says, something about Ephraim, and that's interesting. Hosea chapter 7, verse 8 through 9 says, Ephraim, he have mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned. Strangers have devoured his strength, and he knoweth it not. The phrase Ephraim is a cake not turned means because eventually the tribe of Ephraim would mix himself with Gentile nations, and in particular, Gentile nations that descend from Japheth, Noah's son Japheth. There were descendants of Japheth that if you read Genesis 10, verse 5, it mentions that the descendants of Japheth were called the Isles, or the continent of the Gentiles. So the word Gentile is a general term that can apply to any nationality of people, yet the way it's used in Genesis 10:5, it's used in a specific way, referring to the descendants of Japheth. I want you to keep that in mind as we review some things tonight. And more than any other tribe of Israel, now this is from the observation of this passage in Hosea, where it says Ephraim is a cake not turned, which means if you don't turn a cake over to be brown, it just looks like white flour. All right, so if he's a cake not turned, then that means what you see is something that don't look like you, that don't look black. Now, this is because Ephraim mixed himself, it said in Hosea, verse 8, among the people, which is a reference to the Gentiles, which is another reference to Japheth's children, who in Genesis 10:5 are called the Gentiles, more specifically. So basically, more than any other tribe of Israel, much of Ephraim no longer looks black, but white. Now, this is very controversial because, we got Israelites that are into skin theology, and if it don't meet that litmus test, it ain't worth talking about. But hey, we got to look at what the Most High is saying, not what man is saying, or, Yah's got other plans. He said, Ephraim's a cake not turned. He's looking white because what? He got mixed with other nationalities. Now, being white is not a sin. Being white is not a curse, no more than being black is a sin, or being black is a curse. And it's not weak to say that Yah loves all people. Now, I know some Israelite camps don't want to hear that, but it's the truth. And, people got to grow up and face reality, because every day they go to work, these same people who say the white man, the devil, they go to work and work around white folk who they have to depend on for favors to help them in their job. And see, so, when you put on your Superman suit, look like a Hebrew Power Ranger, stand on them street corners, yeah, you can shout all that, the white man devil stuff, but when you get to work and say, oh, hi, Bob, how are you doing? How are your children doing? You see, they don't want you to see that part, because naturally, instinctively, inside of all mankind, there's a kindred spirit, because we're all the children of Adam. By one blood, Yah made all race of men to dwell on the face of the earth. So some of this notion of saying somebody's white, like I've heard there was a video somebody out there called Sakari put out, bless his heart, he's a new young man up and coming in the truth. And he's gotten on there woofing about Pastor Dow out of Straightway. He's a white man. He's not a Hebrew. He's not, well, now look, because his grandfather was a white man, does that mean he can't be a part of Israel? because of that. You see how outrageous and inconsistent we are, and cruel we are to each other. And we hope this lesson tonight will straighten out some of that madness. So now, we do know that, as it said in that passage in Hosea chapter 7, verse 8 through 9, that Ephraim mostly looks like the white dough side of a pancake. It had not been turned over to be browned by the heat of fire. Now, according to the ethnic DNA chart that I found in Wikipedia, and then a paper by a geneticist from Harvard, it's estimated that about 4% of Ashkenazi Jews do have the Hebrew Israelite Y haplogroup that 80% of African American men have, which is E1B1A. Now, this is where, and I do love the brother Ron Dalton, but this is where Hebrews and Negroes messed up. They got it where all of the Jewish people, because they look white, that is the white one, they're not the real people. Yet the diagnostic research by credible peer-reviewed geneticists shows that 4% of them have E1B1A. So if there's like close to about 12 million Jewish people, and vast majority of them look white, then that means 4% of that 12 million would be, they look white, but they got the same DNA that most of the Hebrew Israelite men in America have, E1B1A. But these people look white. Now, for me to say that all of the Ashkenazi, all of the Mizrahi Jews, and all of the Sephardic Jews, none of them are the real people. They're all synagogue of Satan. And you know what that would be? I hate to say this, because I know this is what Kyrie and Kanye have been accused of, but if you're calling people that are Israelites by ancestry through the Y DNA of E1B1A, and you're telling them they're not Israelites, guess what? You are being anti-Semitic, because these are real Israelites. They got the same DNA signature, E1B1A, that over 80% of African-American men have, which is now known. Dr. Elhak and Dr. Reich of Harvard, they have shown, and these are Jewish professors, that E1B1A is the parent stock of the ancient Israelites. And that's singularly, that's the most dominant DNA of African Americans. And even the ones who don't have it as their paternal DNA, they're saturated with it through their autosomal DNA, which is a combination of the father and the mother's DNA. So you see, somebody might say, well, Pastor Dow's a white man. He can't be Israelite because his grandfather was white and it passed down from grandfather to son to him. So he can't be nothing else. That's ridiculous, because you can just look at Pastor Dow. Yeah, that may be true. His grandfather was white, but you look at him, he looks black. So that meant there's a lot of E1B1A in him through his autosomal DNA from his mother and his father, and on his mother's side, her father's DNA is in him. So I mean, we got to grow up and look at the way Yah's looking at this. Don't look at things the way man looks at it. And we also know that 8.4% of Sephardic Jews are haplogroup E1B1A. And this is why, you know, our brother Ron Dalton, he messed up with Hebrews the Negroes, saying even they were all not the people. I mean, it's history. If anybody who studies history knows, history, it has all kind of twists and turns to it. So we can't be so dogmatic to figure out that just all Israelites look black. And it's certain for sure not all Israelites look white. And it's certain for sure not all Israelites look brown. They look like what the prophet Jeremiah said, they look like a speckled bird. And we hear people cite that, but they don't really mean it. Because when you look at a speckled bird, it got black and white. And then some of them a little more fancier color with it. But now, getting back to our case. So this research that we just discussed, there's a small portion of, for instance, Israeli Jews. That's right, Israeli Jews. There's a small portion of them who actually are Hebrews, even though they look white. Nonetheless, they got the Israelite DNA that you and I have. Even though Jewish people are primarily a group, the vast majority of them are primarily Gentile converts who are clustered around a small segment of ancient Northern Kingdom Israelites from Ephraim and the other 10 tribes that were scattered into the regions of the Caucasus Mountains of Eurasia by the Assyrians in the year 720 BC. As we read here in 2 Kings chapter 6, chapter 17, verse 6, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Hala and in Habor by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. Now Hala, Habar, and the river Gozan that's mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6, Hala, Habar, and the river Gozan are regions of northern Mesopotamia that lead up into the Caucasus Mountains, where the Ephraimites mix with Caucasian nations. And according to 2 Kings 17, verse 24, many of these Caucasian people were moved into northern Israel by the Assyrians to replace the northern tribes of Ephraim and the 10 tribes. Verse 24 says, and the king of Assyria brought men from, verse 24 of chapter 17 of 2 Kings. It says, and the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, from Kuta, from Ava, and from Hamad, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the city of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities there. These foreign Gentiles that moved into the land, that were moved into the land by the Assyrians, requested that some of the exiled Israelites, such as the Ephraimites, would come and teach them the ways of Yahweh, because lions were killing them in the land of the Israelites. And this is around 720 BC. It says in verse 25 of chapter 17 of 2 Kings, it says, and so it was at the beginning of their dwelling there that they feared not Yah, speaking of these foreigners. Therefore Yah sent lions among them and slew some of them. Wherefore they spake to the king of Assyria, saying, the lion, the nations which thou hast moved and placed in the cities of Samaria, know not the manner of the Elohim of the land. Therefore he hath sent lions among them, and behold, they slay them, because they know not the manner of the Elohim of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, saying, carry thither one of the priests whom you brought forth from thence, and let them go and dwell there, and let him teach them the manner of the Elohim of the land. Then one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and dwelt in Bethel and taught them how they should fear Yahweh. Now keep in mind, Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, where the tribe of Ephraim had been dominant before they were carried away in exile by the Assyrians in 720 BC. One of their priests were was brought back by the Assyrians to convert these foreign people who had replaced them in the land. So this account in 2 Kings is an example of how the prophecy of Jacob in Genesis 48:19 regarding how that through the seed of Ephraim would come the fullness of Gentile converts. And as more of the Ephraimites, some of them remained in the land, they intermarried with these Gentiles. So even though those Gentiles have a DNA ancestrally through their paternal lineage, that's not Israelite, but is Japhetic, nonetheless, in their autosomal through intermarriage, as they intermarried with Hebrew young ladies, then in their autosomal, they acquired some Hebrew Israelite bloodlines through their mothers, Israelite mothers, through intermarriage. As time went on, they converted to the faith of the Israelites and the way of life of the Israelites, and they intermarried among the Israelites. So this is to be expected. This is what happened. Now, the mystery Shaul is referring to in Romans 11:25 is interesting. The mystery is that during the time that the natural ethnic Israelites would be in blindness and darkness, certainly the tribe of Ephraim was in a lot of blindness and darkness, so much so the prophet Hosea said, leave Ephraim alone, he's turned to idols. Yeah. However, as strange as it seems, and like my brother Elder Yahuda said earlier, favors not fair. You know, that is, when somebody say, I'm gonna do you a favor, that don't mean they're doing good to you because you earned it. Like if I asked somebody, my car broke down and I needed, my battery jumped, I said, can you do me a favor? Well, that person, I can't say to that person, help me because I helped you, because I don't even know him. I'm asking him to do me a favor for nothing, for no reason other than just to help me. So favor's never fair. It's not based on, it's just because Yah decides to do good in spite of our faults. That not because of our faults, but in spite of our faults. So the mystery is that during the time that the natural ethnic Israelites will be in blindness and darkness, somehow Yah would raise up through Ephraim a connection to bring in the fullness of Gentile converts to take on the identity of Israelites. Now, Paul warned the converts to Israel that Yahweh would once again return his attention to the ancient, actual ethnic bloodline Israelites and restore them to their original identity and heritage of Israel, as we see that's taking place in this awakening. And when Yah restores the original Israelites to their heritage, Shaul warns the converts of the Gentiles to not oppose the restored natural branches of Israelites when they turn back to Yah, or else they, the converts, would be plucked out from being identified with Israel. Now, you know, Yah's fair, but, you know, Yah's not blind. If those that were adopted into Israel, then all of a sudden they stand up against the natural Israelites that are being reconnected to their heritage and history. Well, Yah's not going to stand for that. Paul says in verse 17, and if some of the branches be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree were grafted in among them, and with them partakers of the root and fatness of the olive tree, boast not against the branches. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root bear thee. Thou wilt say, the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. For if Elohim spared not the natural branches, Take heed, lest he also spare not thee. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of Elohim on them which fail, severity, but toward thee goodness. If thou continue in his goodness, otherwise thou also shalt be cut off. And they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. For Elohim is able to graft them in again. Elohim is able to graft you and me back into our history and heritage again, and he's doing it right now in this awakening. But to the Gentile converts, Shaul says this in verse 24, if thou wert cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, that's talking about you and me, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? So currently, the state of Israel and the Anti-Defamation League and these others that rose up against Kyrie Irving and Kanye West, all of these people that are for the most part converts. Currently, the state of Israel and these people, like the Anti-Defamation League, they have opposed the awakening of the original Israelites. Not only that, you got Gentile Christians that call us a cult and that rise up, send people like Vocab Malone and these so-called Christian apologists to make it seem like this is a cult and they speak evil of us. They don't want to hear all the truth about it. They just want to attack us. Well, I got bad news for them. Y'all's watching that. He's the one that's caused us to awaken. Left to ourselves, we'd still be in dark. But it's his mercy, it's his favor that we're awakening now, and they're getting in the way. They would be wise, like what that great teacher of Shaul said to Israelites, to people in the time of the past. You better be careful, because you may find yourself fighting Yah when you fight this awakening. And in fact, they are fighting Yah. And as such, the government of the state of Israel, who are comprised of primarily Gentile converts of Ephraim, they're about to be cut down. I'm here to tell you, the state of Israel is about to be cut down to the ground. And whatever remains and is left of it is going to be very small. So as Yah says in Isaiah 17:3, the fortress or government of Ephraim will fall. See, primarily the converts to Israel, they are called Ephraim. Not that they are all bloodline descendants of Ephraim, but they're converts to Yah through the exiles of Ephraim. So the fullness of the Gentile nationalities engrafted into the Israelite nation, when it's concluded, many of them will be cut off from the Israel of Yah when the state of Israel will fall. And it's now that Yah is returning his redemption to the original bloodline Israelite people that we are. So verse 26 of the book of Romans, chapter 11 says, and so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins, as concerning the gospel, that is the good news. They are enemies for your sake. See, they're enemies of the good news about you. Many of these people. But as touching the election, they are beloved for the Father's sake. Well, for Ephraim's sake, that as Jacob had foretold. Verse 29, for the gifts and callings of Elohim are without repentance. That is, Yah's already called this process out. Now, what is man that he should get in the way with what Yah's doing? So then all Israelites who have believed and called on the name of Yeshua will be saved. Romans 11 says in verse 9 that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Master Yahshua and believe in thine heart that Elohim hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the scripture saith, whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. For there is no difference between the Yahudi, the Jew, and the Greek. For the same Yahweh over all is rich unto all that call upon him. For whosoever shall call upon the name of Yah shall be saved. Hallelujah. Now, I must be honest, beloved. I've read this, I've studied this, and right now I'm gonna give a little testimony. I didn't understand it, but just in the last 2 days, as you all know, some of us have taken the ancestry genetic testing. I've done 4 of these with 4 different companies. The one that I've really liked the most was My True Ancestry, because they take your DNA and compare it to ancient archaeological sites. Whereas the other DNA companies, they just compare your DNA with modern population groups. So many Israelites, when they go through Ancestry.com or 23andMe, it just says, okay, West Africa primarily in the same country. But see, people don't understand that most of the people in West Africa that are E1B1A, which is a large percentage of people in West Africa, they did not originate in West Africa. And when you compare your DNA to ancient archaeological DNA, you'll find through that one, your DNA will match with the Levant or the so-called Middle East. Even some of the tribes, like for instance, the Yoruba on the west coast of Africa, in their oral traditions, they already tell you, we didn't originate here in West Africa. We came from the Middle East and moved there because they have the Israelite DNA. Now, they don't know everything, but they got enough of that in terms of that record, you see. However, for African-American people, what we've discovered is there have been waves of Israelites leaving Israel for a long time. And some of the earlier waves of Israelites going to West Africa went all the way back into the times of Jeremiah, when they were fleeing from the Babylonians. And then later waves moved way over to West Africa after the Roman destruction. Now, what's so fascinating in the review about African-Americans though, you were like the last wave of Israelites to move all the way to West Africa. You mostly went up into North Africa and Spain and Portugal. That's where you were up among the Moors. This is why a lot of brothers always fascinated. They do the ancient archaeological DNA, and it can trace them all the way to the Middle East and to peoples in the Middle East. And so I was reviewing that, and the other day, I was looking at the DNA of some people that are connected to me. So if y'all could indulge me, just be patient with me. I'm gonna pull something up on the screen right now that indicates the fulfillment of this prophecy of Yaakov, that Ephraim will be the father of many nations, all right? As you know, there's a community in Israel, particularly in the region of Halon, Israel, which is slightly to the north of Tel Aviv. And Ema, Deborah, and I had some friends who we stayed with in Halon back in 1993 when we went over there. And there's a community there. It's been there a while. It's called the Samaritans. All right. Well, the Samaritans have been in the land a long time. They claim they're the tribe of Ephraim. um, and Manasseh. All right. And what was so peculiar, and I've got a little video clip, I just want to show it to you briefly. I won't take long. That they're speaking about it. So I want to show you something, how this prophecy of Jacob over Ephraim, how it's developing right now before I stand by, beloved.
Good Samaritan. But have you ever met any Samaritan? If you haven't, we're going to see some today. And if you have, I'm sure you will be happy to see them again. So let's go. I am in Holon in the neighborhood called Neve Pinchas, which is mostly known as a Samaritan neighborhood.
Stand by, let me get out of this
The current shift in focus is fine.
Who are the Samaritans?
שמי בנימין צדקה, ואני מקהילת הישראלים השומרונים, הגרה בחולון, דרומה לתל אביב. כאן גרה מחצית הקהילה השומרונית, והמחצית השנייה גרה במרומי הר גריזים, הר הברכה, מעל שכם. לחולון אנחנו הגענו ב-1955, סבא, אבי אמי, הנה הוא נמצא כאן בתמונה, בצד ימין, הוא כינס את כל השומרונים במדינת ישראל למקום אחד, לשכונה אחת, וזאת שכונת השומרונים כאן בחולון, שבה כל הגרים בהם ישראלים שומרונים, ויש לנו גם 2 בתי כנסת, כך שחיי הקהילה נשמרים היטב. השומרונים הם צאצאי מלכות ישראל, כשהעילית לתוך המלכות היו השבטים אפרים מנשה, או שבט יוסף.
Okay, y'all hear that? He said, look at it. The Samaritans are descendants of...
הם צאצאי מלכות ישראל, כשהעילית לתוך המלכות היו השבטים.
They are descendant of the tribes of what? Ephraim and Manasseh or Manasseh, the 2 brothers that we read about in our text tonight in chapter 48 of Genesis. Now, this man, this brother doesn't look like you or me, does he? I mean, he looks white. So let's look at this. Is he lying? I don't think he's intentionally lying. I don't think he's trying to play a game. I don't think it's anything sinister like that. But I believe if we just look a little bit closer, didn't we read what it said in Hosea? Chapter 7, verse 8. Ephraim is a cake not turned. So what does that mean he's going to look like? He's going to look like, a lot of Ephraim today would look like him. Now, I know there are some tribes in West Africa that said Ephraim, particularly among the Yoruba. That's true. Not all Ephraim today looks white. but there are some Ephraim that look white. And he's a clear example of what I'm talking about. Now, I'm gonna move on from there. Let me move on to something else, the genetics of this particular group of people. Stand by. Okay. The genetics.
4 אוניברסיטאות ידועות בעולם שמתמחות בחקר גנטי חקרו את השומרונים, כל אחת לעצמה. הם לא רק חקרו את השומרונים, הם חקרו את כל עדות ישראל ועדות המזרח התיכון, גם ערבים, פלסטינאים, דרוזים, תימנים, לכולם היו אותם נתונים, הם הגיעו לאותן מסקנות.
Now, do y'all see this?
והם מצאו, ללא ספק, שיהודים, שומרונים ופלסטינים, יש להם אותו DNA.
Okay.
גם משותף.
Did you hear what he's saying? He's saying that the Samaritans, the Palestinians, and the Israelis, who are mostly the Ashkenazi, the European Jews, and this would include even now the Sephardic and the Mizrahi Jews from Arab countries. Okay, they all share the same blood. Yeah, okay, now, here's what's fascinating about that. Most Jewish people are not E1B1A by paternal ancestry. Most of the Samaritans by far are not E1B1A by paternal ancestry. Most Palestinians are not E1B1A, ancient Israelite bloodline, by paternal ancestry. And most of the Druze, he mentioned, and most of the Yemenites, and most of the Bedouins, they're not E1B1A, yet he's saying they all have blood of the ancient Jews. Now, you remember now, Ephraim did what? And in Hosea, it said he mixed himself with a multitude of people. For this reason, Jacob said he would be a father of many nations. So this man just named a bunch of different nationalities, says that they're all one blood. Okay, so what is that DNA blood that mainly he's talking about? Because I can tell you what he is. He's from haplogroup J. J is not a Shemitic bloodline. That is a Japhetic bloodline. J, haplogroup. That is a Turkic. That's from the Turkish people's DNA. Now, most of the Samaritans are J. Most of the Ashkenazi Jewish people are J. Over 90% of them are J. They're Japhetic people. He's primarily a Japhetic man from his paternal ancestry. The Druze and the Palestinians. I mean, these are all people there in the Middle East now. Bunch of different people. It's a bunch of people there. You know, Jacob said, Ephraim will be the father of a multitude of nations. And it looks like this fullness of Gentiles have converged around the land of Israel right now. Now, the plot thickens. I went ahead and did an investigation in my own DNA in regards to this. This blew my mind. Stand by. And this is basically what you're going to find, those of you that go deep into your own genetics through my true ancestors, you're going to find out something. That somehow these people right here, they're related to you. And it's not because of rape through slavery. See, everybody tends to look at our ancestry beyond Africa as ancestry that came from slavery. But the reality is there were no Samaritan slave owners in the South. There were no Palestinian slave owners in the South. There were no Yemenite slave owners in the South, in Mississippi and Alabama. There were no Druze slave owners in the South. So slavery does not explain this. But the word of Yah does explain it. Now, case in point. Now let me pull up my DNA. I'm going to show you something. Stand by. Now this is a man, he's saying they are Ephraim, they are the tribe of Manasseh, his brother, the two young men that Jacob put his hand over and blessed, Joseph's two sons. All right, well, let's look at this. What is their relationship to us? And I really want you to see this. Please bear with me. Stand by. Okay, I'm gonna pull up my chart here on my true ancestors. Please, I hope I don't lose anybody. If I get a little off, I'll be quick to get back on. Okay, this is my genetic kit, Alvin Elmore. That's my government name, Alvin Elmore. Okay, I'm going to, can you all see the screen okay? All right, so I'm going to the haplogroup analytics. All right, Y-DNA breakdown. Now, this is something that blew my mind. Okay. This is the J haplogroup. Now, in my pie chart of all my DNA, I'm E1B1A, and that's the largest percentage of what I am. But all these others are other haplogroups, though my male paternal haplogroup is E1B1A. However, I have some of the same DNA that man that you just saw has, J. This is in my pie chart of my DNA. So I said, now let's look at this. Okay. Then I investigated further. There was these different locations where they dug up through archaeological sites the DNA of people in the land of Israel that I'm related to. That if you do the same process, vast majority of my brothers, people like Benea Israel, Pastor Kelly, a whole bunch of brothers, Pastor Brown, I mean, we all come to this chart at the same place. We all have a little J DNA, which is a Japhetic DNA, but it's not a Japhetic DNA that Euro Gentiles in America had that enslaved. This is a Middle Eastern, Central Asian Japhetic, Japhetic Gentile bloodline. This is not whites from England, Scotland, and Ireland, like mostly enslaved us in the South. This is something else. Okay, so what I did was I went to one of the finds that they had uncovered. Okay, and guess what? When they did my modern DNA, guess who were my closest modern DNA relatives in the Middle East? Jordanian, Palestinian, Syrian, Samaritan, Manasseh tribe, Lebanese, Samaritan Levi tribe, Druze, Syrian Jews. Now, what's fascinating about this is, by the way, you see these numbers, these aren't percentage numbers of how much of you is that. This is showing distance in terms of whether they are actually related to you. All right. And if it's 10 and under, that means these are people that are definitely descended from your ancestors. Now, the reality is these people are J haplogroup. I'm E haplogroup. So how in the world am I so closely related to them? How am I so closely related to a Jordanian? I mean, where it's like 5.20. I mean, that's real close. That means if I went to Jordan, there's somebody walking around there that's one of my relatives, or a Palestinian, or a Syrian, or a Samaritan, like that gentleman that we just saw. Now, they look white, I look black. Okay, now, and then when you really look at it, they gave me more with the PCA, modern, Algerian Jewish, Tunisian Jews. Now, wait a minute, what's in us? Lebanese Muslims, Syrians, Iraqi, Jews from Georgia, not Georgia, America, but Georgia in Central Asia, some Egyptian, Bedouin, Jordanian, Samaritan Ephraim tribe, Palestinian, Lebanese Christian, Samaritan Manasseh tribe, Samaritan Levi tribe. Now, these are all the people that gentleman was saying that he came from. But their J haplogroup was the Japhetic haplogroup. I'm E, which is the ancient paternal DNA parent stock of the ancient Israelite people. So how come they are related to me? Well, beloved, this is what has happened. Just as Jacob said, how did Ephraim become the father of many nations? Well, look at this. All of these people, for the most part, are Gentile people. They have Japhetic DNA. They don't have Shemitic DNA. Now, a lot of people look at the Middle East and say, oh, these are the real Shemites. They're not. These are Turks. The Turkish people invaded the Middle East 1,000 years ago. So most of the people there, their parent stock are Turkish. Turkish people, like the Khazars and others, they're the children of Japheth, primarily through Togarmah, one of the sons of Japheth. Okay, so the question is, how am I related to that gentleman? Well, what we've discovered is all of these people are your cousins. These are all your cousins. These are all your cousins in the Middle East, but you the original one that actually is from there. They're not, their fathers are not from the Middle East. Their fathers are from Central Asia. But what happened? Why then, all of a sudden in my DNA, it connects to their DNA, even though my paternal stock is E1B1A. Well, here's the answer. And believe it or not, this is the answer to the mystery that Paul's talking about in Romans 11:25. But would not that you be ignorant, brethren, of this one thing, that blindness has happened unto Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles come. These represent people of the fullness of Gentiles coming into Israel. And I'm going to show you how this works out. I have a little illustration to show you. Stand by. It's a little cartoon animation. That's the best I can show to explain the complexity of this. Stand by.
136 AD. The Hebrews' revolt developed into full-scale fighting, and in the year 132 AD, we have what is called the Second Jewish Revolt. Tinius Rufus was the Roman governor of Judea at the time. Jerusalem was still in ruins after the first Jewish revolt that led to the destruction of the temple. Emperor Hadrian at the time wanted to rebuild Jerusalem as a Roman colony. He wanted to assimilate Jerusalem with Rome's already traditional pagan culture. So he dealt harshly with the Hebrews there. He placed many restrictions on their way of life, like banning circumcisions. This eventually led to a revolt by the Hebrews led by Simon Bar Kokhba. These Jews were crushed by the Romans, and Emperor Hadrian wiped the province of Judea off the Roman map, renaming it Syria Palestina. He renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina after himself and rebuilt it as a typical Roman town. It would be this way until the 7th century when the Arabs conquered the city. I'll get to that though. After this, thousands of Jews migrated to Egypt and Arabia. The persecutions and restrictions imposed on the Jews were so great that a large number of Jews fled into Arabia. During the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, Judaism was politically powerful in Arabia. This power was predicated around trade. There were many Jew kings. We had Abu Kariba, Masruk Abraha, and most notably, Du Nuwas. Yemen at one time was a stronghold of Jewish kings. By the early part of the 6th century AD, Jewish power in Yemen reached its height. This was the time of the golden age of the Black Jews in Yemen, never to be achieved again. They were conducting international trade of commodities with the East and West. During that time, there was a number of Arab converts to Judaism that intermarried with the original Jews.
Y'all hear
Du
that?
Nuwas was one of these Arabs who converted to Judaism.
Did y'all hear this?
Right.
As we scattered into Arab countries with the destruction of Jerusalem, some of the Arabs converted to our teachings, and we intermarried with them. We gave our daughters to them, and our sons married some of their girls, and their sons married some of our girls. Now, people don't understand today, most of the Arabs, vast majority of them in the Arabian Peninsula are haplogroup J. And most of the ones in North Africa, like Morocco, Algeria, they're haplogroup J. So why are they, I looked at it and said, why are they so closely related to me? He just explained it. Our fathers married their girls, and our girls married their sons, because these Arabs, this is pre-Islamic time, they intermarried with our daughters, so that the offspring of such a union would be the father's paternal line, like the Samaritan that I saw just now. The Good Samaritan. I'm gonna call him the Good Samaritan. He seemed like a nice guy. So I'm gonna call him the Good Samaritan. But his haplogroup is J, which is a Gentile Japhetic haplogroup. Then why is he related to me? It's because he is a descendant, more than likely, of an Ephraimite girl that had a baby by a J haplogroup Gentile man that had converted to Judaism. I tried to make it as clear and plain. This king Du Nuwas in Yemen is an example of that. He is more than likely a J haplogroup, but he married, more than likely, a Hebrew girl after he converted. So the father descent still is going to show J, but on his mother's side, his mother has E1B1A in her autosomal DNA. And that's why somebody like Du Nuwas, or like that Samaritan, they can be real close cousins to us, because this is the prophecy that Yah said would happen. If you talk with the Yoruba in West Africa, they have an oral tradition that they originally came from Arabia, that they didn't originate in West Africa. And that's a big tribe. And likewise, the Igbo. And just about all of those E1B1A tribes, I'll say we didn't originate here. We came from the Middle East. And the Yoruba specifically say they came from around the area of Mecca. Well, we just saw in the area of Mecca in pre-Islamic times, Hebrews were ruling down there after we were scattered from Israel. And there's a lot of the Arabs that converted. Some of them took on the J, they were J haplogroups. And so, as that man was pointing out, the Druze, the Palestinians, the Samaritans, and even the Jewish people, the largest DNA of the Jewish people is J. So what does that mean of the Ashkenaz? Well, that means as much as I know a lot of Israelites won't like this, what I'm about to say, but the fact of the matter is that they pop up. I mean, there was no Jewish slave owner from Georgia in Central Asia in the South. or from the Saudi Arabia and all them places. So, and they got this Japhetic, Gentile, Turkish DNA. The only way it can happen is just what, like the scripture said. Ephraim, more than any of the other Israelites, he mixed himself and intermarried with all of these people, so that they are not by paternal ancestry Israelites, but they do have Israelite blood through their mothers. Maybe that's why, among Jewish people, and I don't agree with this conclusion they have, but that your whole identity by their standards is through your mother, even though most of their mothers weren't Israelite girls. But there was a number of them that were the descendants of girls that were Israelite.